You want to know what counterintelligence really looks like? Forget the movies. Forget the dramatic confrontations and the car chases. Real counterintelligence is watching a man eat his lunch for 6 weeks straight and noticing he orders the same goddamn sandwich every Tuesday and Thursday, but never on Wednesday. Real counterintelligence is understanding that pattern means something. That pattern tells you when he's meeting his handler. And I'm going to tell you about the time we had a double agent working right inside our own embassy, a local national who'd been feeding classified intelligence to the opposition for God knows how long, and how we turned that son of a bitch into our own personal disinformation pipeline. We didn't arrest him. We didn't expose him. We fed him lies, beautiful, carefully crafted lies. And we watched those lies travel up the enemy's chain of command like poison in the bloodstream. This was the early 80s. Cold War still running hot. I was working as a security consultant for State Department facilities in a country I'm not going to name because some things stay classified even 40 years later. Let's just say it was a place where half the local staff had relatives in the opposition government and the other half had relatives in prison for opposing the opposition government. Complicated place. Messy loyalties, perfect environment for penetration. The embassy employed maybe 70 local nationals, drivers, translators, administrative staff, maintenance workers. Every single one of them had access to something. Maybe not to classified documents directly, but to patterns, to schedules, to faces, to conversations in hallways. You put together enough small pieces of nothing, and eventually you've got something. That's how intelligence works. That's how penetration works. My job was to find the leaks. We knew we had them. We knew because operations were getting compromised, safe houses were getting burned, assets were disappearing, sources were drying up. The local opposition intelligence service, we'll call them the service, they knew too goddamn much about what we were doing. They were always one step ahead. Always. So state brought me in. Not officially. My cover was a telecommunications consultant. I was there to upgrade the secure communications infrastructure, which meant I had a legitimate reason to be in every office, every corridor, every restricted area. I could ask questions. I could observe. I could install monitoring equipment that had nothing to do with telecommunications. I started with the basics: background checks, financial records, travel patterns, looking for the obvious red flags, sudden wealth, unexplained travel, association with known service personnel. Found nothing. Whoever our leak was, they were smart. They weren't leaving obvious tracks. So I shifted to observation. I watched people. I watched routines. I watched deviations from routines. I ate lunch in the cafeteria every day. I learned who sat with who. I learned who avoided who. I learned the social architecture of the place. And I noticed one guy, local national named Kareem, mid-30s, administrative assistant in the political section. Smart guy. Spoke 4 languages. Been working at the embassy for 7 years. Impeccable record. Everybody liked him. Friendly, helpful, always smiling. He smiled too much. Now that sounds like bullshit tradecraft. I know. Guy smiles too much, so he must be a spy. But here's the thing. I'd been doing this work since the 60s. I'd run operations in Vietnam, in Laos, in a dozen other places where your life depended on reading people correctly. And I'd learned that genuinely happy people don't smile constantly. They smile when something's funny or pleasant. But constant smiling, that's performance. That's management. That's somebody working very hard to be liked. Kareem was working very hard to be liked. So I started watching Kareem specifically. His routine was predictable. Arrived at the embassy every morning around 7:30. Coffee in the cafeteria, at his desk by 8 o'clock, lunch at noon, left the embassy at 5 o'clock every evening. Normal schedule, normal life, except for Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Kareem left the embassy at lunch. He told people he was going to his mother's house to check on her. She was elderly. She lived alone. Filial duty. Very respectable. Nobody questioned it. But here's what I noticed. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Kareem ordered a sandwich from the cafeteria at 11:30 in the morning, before lunch. He ate it at his desk. Then at noon, he left the embassy, supposedly to have lunch at his mother's house, but he'd already eaten. He came back at 1 o'clock, exactly on schedule. That's a pattern. That's a deviation. That's a tell. I decided to follow him. Following somebody in a foreign city, when you're a 6-foot-tall American with a face that screams military, is not easy. I couldn't just walk behind the guy. I needed a team. But I couldn't use embassy personnel because I didn't know who else might be compromised. I couldn't use local assets because I didn't know who to trust. So I did it myself. With modifications, I borrowed clothes from the embassy maintenance staff. Local style. I bought a motorcycle, a beat-to-hell Chinese piece of shit that barely ran but blended in perfectly with local traffic. I wore sunglasses and a local-style cap. I kept distance. I used the traffic itself as cover. First Tuesday I followed him. Kareem left the embassy at noon, on foot. He walked 4 blocks to a bus stop, took a crowded local bus heading into the old city. I followed on the motorcycle, staying 3 or 4 vehicles back. The bus stopped at the central marketplace. Kareem got off, disappeared into the crowd. I parked the motorcycle. Followed on foot. The marketplace was perfect for counter-surveillance. Narrow alleys, dense crowds, multiple exits. If Kareem was trained, and I was starting to think he was, he'd use this environment to check for tails. I watched him move through the market. He stopped at a fruit stand, bought oranges, stopped at a fabric shop, didn't buy anything, just looked, stopped at a tea stall, ordered tea, sat down, drank slowly. He was checking his back trail. Classic dry cleaning routine. You move through a complex environment, make random stops, watch for the same faces appearing multiple times. If you're being followed, you'll spot the surveillance. I stayed back. I didn't follow directly. I used the market itself. I positioned myself at a spice vendor's stall where I could see the tea stall through the crowd. I bought spices I didn't need. I haggled. I looked like every other customer. After 20 minutes, Kareem finished his tea. He walked out of the market, heading south. I followed at a distance. He walked 6 blocks to a public park. Small park. Trees. Benches. Old men playing checkers. Kids kicking a soccer ball. Kareem sat down on a specific bench. 3rd bench from the north entrance. He took out a newspaper. He read, "I found a position on the far side of the park." I sat on the ground, leaning against a tree. Looked like I was taking a break, resting. I watched. Kareem read his newspaper for 15 minutes. Then another man approached. Mid-40s, well-dressed, civilian clothes, but something about his bearing said military or intelligence. The man sat down on the same bench, not next to Kareem. At the other end, maybe 6 feet of space between them. They didn't look at each other. They didn't speak. They just sat there, 2 strangers on a park bench. The other man also had a newspaper. He read it. After 5 minutes, he stood up. He left his newspaper on the bench. He walked away heading west. Kareem waited. He read his own newspaper for another 10 minutes. Then he casually reached over and picked up the newspaper the other man had left. He folded it. He put it in his bag. He stood up. He walked back the way he'd come. Classic dead drop. No direct contact. No conversation. Just an exchange of newspapers. Whatever intelligence Kareem was passing, documents, photographs, written reports, it was hidden inside that newspaper. And whatever instructions or payment the service was giving him, it was in the newspaper he picked up. I didn't follow the other man. I didn't need to. I knew who he was working for. I followed Kareem back to the bus stop, back to the embassy. He arrived at 1 o'clock, right on schedule, smiling, friendly, helpful Kareem. I had him. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because what I had was evidence. What I had was proof that Kareem was a double agent. What I had was everything I needed to roll him up, arrest him, interrogate him, prosecute him, throw his ass in prison, or ship him back to Washington for a very unpleasant conversation. That's what the book says you do. That's what the regulations say. You find a penetration, you eliminate it. You protect the embassy. You protect the operations. You send a message. But that's not what I recommended. I went to the chief of station. I laid out everything I had, the pattern, the dead drop, the service handler, the whole operation. And then I said, we don't arrest him, we use him. The chief of station looked at me like I'd lost my goddamn mind. Use him how? He said. We feed him lies, I said. We turn him into our disinformation channel. The service thinks they've got a source inside our embassy. They trust Kareem. They trust his intelligence. So we give Kareem intelligence to pass along. Except it's not intelligence. It's carefully designed bullshit. We control what the service knows. We control what they think they know. We turn their own penetration against them. The chief of station was not a stupid man. He understood the concept, but he also understood the risk. If we get this wrong, he said, if they figure out we've flipped their own source, they'll shut down the channel, they'll burn Kareem, and we'll lose any chance of understanding what they're actually after. Then we don't get it wrong, I said. It took 3 days of secure cables back to Langley. It took approvals from people whose names I never knew. It took legal review and operational review and counterintelligence review. But eventually the answer came back, approved. Run the operation. We called it Operation Mockingbird. Not very original, I know, but it fit. A mockingbird imitates other birds. We were going to imitate legitimate intelligence. The rules were simple. We would feed Kareem a mix of intelligence, 90% accurate, 10% false. The accurate intelligence would be low-level, confirmable material that the service could verify through other sources. This built trust. This made Kareem look like a valuable source. The false intelligence would be carefully crafted disinformation designed to achieve specific operational goals, misdirection, confusion, resource waste. We would never feed Kareem anything that could harm actual operations or actual people. We would never burn our own sources. We would never compromise legitimate intelligence. This was about deception, not sabotage. There's a difference. And we would monitor everything. We would watch where the intelligence went. We would track how the service responded. We would measure the impact. This wasn't just about feeding lies. This was about understanding the enemy's decision-making process. This was intelligence collection through counterintelligence. It was a beautiful goddamn operation. On paper, in practice, it was a daily exercise in paranoia and precision. Because if we made one mistake, if we fed Kareem something that contradicted something else, if we gave him intelligence that was too good, if we showed our hand in any way, the whole thing would collapse. The service would know, Kareem would know, and we'd be worse off than when we started. The first piece of disinformation we fed Kareem was simple. We created a false operational schedule. The embassy was planning a visit from a congressional delegation. Real visit, real delegation. They were coming to assess foreign aid programs and meet with local government officials. Routine diplomatic activity. But we altered the schedule. We created a fake itinerary that had the delegation arriving 3 days earlier than they actually were. We included this fake schedule in a classified cable that Kareem had legitimate access to as part of his administrative duties in the political section. We made it look accidental. We made it look like somebody hadn't updated the operational security protocols. We made it look like a bureaucratic screw-up that left classified material where it shouldn't be. Kareem took the bait. I watched him photograph the document at his desk. Small camera, concealed in a pen. He thought he was being careful. He thought nobody was watching, but we had cameras watching the cameras. We documented everything. That Thursday, his regular meeting day, Kareem left the embassy at noon. Same routine, same marketplace, same park, same bench, same dead drop. We didn't follow him. We already knew where he was going. Instead, we monitored the service. We watched to see how they responded to the false information. 3 days before the fake arrival date, the service deployed surveillance teams to the airport. Heavy coverage, maybe 20 personnel. They set up static observation posts. They brought in technical surveillance equipment. They were ready to document the congressional delegation's arrival. They were ready to identify traveling companions, security personnel, advance teams. They were ready to photograph and profile everyone. And nobody showed up because nobody was coming. A delegation wasn't arriving for another 3 days. The service kept their surveillance teams in place for 12 hours. They rotated personnel. They maintained coverage. They were committed. They were burning resources. They were exposing their own operational methods, and they were getting nothing. We photographed their surveillance teams. We identified their personnel. We documented their equipment. We mapped their communications. We collected more intelligence from their failed operation than they'd collected from us in months. When the congressional delegation actually arrived 3 days later, the service wasn't there. They'd pulled their surveillance. They'd assumed the intelligence was wrong. They'd assumed Kareem had made a mistake. They missed the real arrival completely. First operation, success. The service still trusted Kareem, but they'd wasted resources, and we'd gained intelligence. We ran it again. Second operation was more sophisticated. We created a false intelligence report about a local opposition figure, a mid-level government official, who we claimed was considering defection. The report said we were in contact with this official, we were negotiating terms, we were preparing to exfiltrate him and his family. Complete fiction. The official wasn't considering defection. We weren't in contact with him. There was no operation. But we wrote the report like it was real. We included specific details, meeting locations, communication protocols, timeline for exfiltration. We made it detailed enough to be credible. We made it operational enough to require a response. We left the report where Kareem could access it. Political section, safe, combination lock. We knew Kareem had the combination because we'd given it to him months ago for legitimate administrative purposes. We documented him accessing the safe through hidden cameras. We documented him photographing the report. The service responded exactly as we predicted. They arrested the opposition official. They interrogated him. They wanted to know about his contacts with American intelligence. They wanted to know about the defection plan. The official had no idea what they were talking about because there was no defection plan. He denied everything. They didn't believe him. They arrested his family. They pressured him. They destroyed his career. It was brutal. It was effective. And it accomplished exactly what we needed. It created suspicion and paranoia inside the opposition government. It made them question their own people. It made them waste resources investigating a threat that didn't exist. And it made the service trust Kareem even more, because from their perspective, the intelligence was accurate. They'd identified a potential defector. They'd shut down an American operation. Kareem was producing results. We ran 6 more operations over 4 months, each one carefully designed, each one a mix of truth and lies, each one calibrated to achieve a specific goal: misdirection, resource waste, paranoia, confusion. We fed them false intelligence about planned covert actions that never happened. We fed them accurate but useless intelligence about routine diplomatic activities. We fed them intelligence that contradicted other intelligence to create confusion. We fed them intelligence that exposed their own sources when they tried to verify it through independent channels. We were playing chess, multiple moves ahead. Every piece of disinformation was designed not just for its immediate effect, but for how it would shape the service's future decisions and assumptions. And the whole time, Kareem had no idea he was being used. He thought he was a successful spy. He thought he was serving his country. He thought he was beating us. He was smiling every goddamn day because he thought he was winning. 4 months into the operation, something changed. Kareem's handler, the well-dressed man who met him at the park bench, made a mistake. He got careless, or maybe he got confident. Either way, he broke protocol. It was a Thursday. Noon meeting. Same park. Same bench. I wasn't there personally. We'd stopped doing physical surveillance on Kareem's meetings because we didn't need it anymore. We knew the routine. We knew what was being passed. We controlled the intelligence. But we had a static observation post set up in a building overlooking the park. Long-range cameras. Audio surveillance. We documented every meeting. Standard procedure. This particular Thursday, the handler arrived early. He sat on the bench. He waited. Kareem showed up on time. Sat down. They maintained the usual separation, no direct contact, no conversation. But then the handler did something he'd never done before. He spoke. Just a few words. We caught it on audio. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Your information was very valuable, the handler said, in the local language. Quiet, quick, keep it coming. Kareem didn't respond. He just nodded slightly. Then they completed the dead drop exchange as usual. Newspapers swapped. Both men left separately. Small deviation, meaningless on its own, but it told us something important. The handler was getting pressure from his superiors. The service was demanding results. They wanted more intelligence. They wanted higher quality intelligence. They were pushing Kareem's handler to push Kareem. This was good and bad. Good because it meant our disinformation was working. The service was hooked. They wanted more. Bad because increased pressure creates increased risk. Desperate handlers make mistakes. Desperate sources make mistakes. The operation was entering a dangerous phase. We adjusted our approach. We started feeding Kareem slightly better intelligence, still carefully controlled, still designed to achieve our goals, but more substantial, more impressive. The kind of intelligence that would satisfy the service's appetite without actually compromising anything important. We fed him intelligence about planned embassy security upgrades, accurate information about physical security measures we were implementing, cameras, sensors, access controls. From the service's perspective, this was valuable operational intelligence. From our perspective, we were giving them a detailed map of security measures we wanted them to know about. We were showing them the front door while hiding the back door. We fed him intelligence about visiting American officials, accurate names, accurate schedules, accurate itineraries. The service could verify this information through their own observation. This built trust. But the officials we were feeding them were low-level bureaucrats on routine visits, nothing covert, nothing sensitive, just diplomatic activity that would happen whether the service knew about it or not. And we started feeding him intelligence that appeared to be more sensitive but was actually designed to reveal the service's own capabilities and methods. Here's how that worked. We created a report about a planned covert operation. The report described an operation to recruit a local opposition official as an intelligence source. The report included specific details, target identification, approach strategy, communication protocols, complete fiction. No such operation existed. But the report was written as if it were real, as if it were highly classified, as if it were extremely sensitive. We left it where Kareem could access it. He photographed it. He passed it to his handler. The service responded by placing the target official under surveillance. They monitored his movements. They documented his contacts. They were trying to identify when and how American intelligence would make contact with him. But here's the critical part. When the service put the official under surveillance, they used specific surveillance methods. They deployed specific personnel. They used specific vehicles and equipment. They operated in specific patterns. We were watching. We were documenting everything. We were collecting intelligence on how the service conducts surveillance operations. We were mapping their capabilities. We were identifying their personnel. We were understanding their methods. The fake operation was never about the target. It was about forcing the service to reveal how they operate. It was intelligence collection disguised as counterintelligence. This is the part civilians don't understand about intelligence work. It's not about secrets. It's not about stolen documents or covert meetings. It's about understanding how your adversary thinks, how they respond, what they prioritize, what scares them, what makes them careless. Every piece of disinformation we fed through Kareem was simultaneously a test. We were testing the service's analytical capabilities. We were testing their operational discipline. We were testing their decision-making under pressure. And we were learning, constantly learning. By month 6, we understood the service better than they understood themselves. We knew their personnel. We knew their methods. We knew their priorities. We knew their blind spots. We'd mapped their entire local operation simply by watching how they responded to controlled disinformation. It was one of the most successful counterintelligence operations I'd ever been part of. And it all came down to one simple principle. Sometimes the best way to beat your enemy is to let them think they're beating you. The operation ran for 8 months total. Then we shut it down, not because it failed, not because we got compromised. We shut it down because we'd accomplished everything we needed to accomplish. We'd identified the service's entire local network. We'd mapped their surveillance capabilities. We'd documented their personnel. We'd understood their decision-making process. We'd wasted their resources. We'd created paranoia in the opposition government. We'd protected our own operations by controlling what the enemy knew about them. Most importantly, we'd proven a concept that sometimes the most effective counterintelligence isn't about finding and eliminating penetrations, it's about using them. The decision to shut down came from Langley. The assessment was that we'd extracted maximum value from the operation, and continuing it created increasing risk of exposure. Better to end it on our terms and let it collapse on theirs. So we did something very specific. We fed Kareem one final piece of intelligence, a report about a planned operation that was so sensitive, so compartmented, so closely held, that the service would immediately recognize it as extremely valuable. The operation was real. It was happening. But it was already completed. By the time Kareem passed the intelligence to his handler, by the time the service received it and analyzed it and prepared to respond, the operation would already be done. They'd have accurate intelligence about something that no longer mattered. This accomplished 2 things. First, it maintained Kareem's credibility. From the service's perspective, he was producing high-value intelligence right up to the end. Second, it gave us a clean exit. The operation completed successfully despite the intelligence leak, which would make the service question whether their source was still reliable or whether we'd somehow compromised the information. Kareem made his final dead drop on a Thursday afternoon in the park. Same bench, same routine. We documented it. We watched the handler collect the information. We watched him leave. 3 days later, Kareem didn't show up for work. The embassy received a phone call from his family. Kareem had been arrested. The local security service, not the intelligence service, the regular police had detained him on suspicion of espionage. We didn't arrange the arrest. We didn't tip off the local security service. What happened was this. The opposition government had multiple intelligence and security agencies. They didn't always coordinate. They didn't always share information. The service had been running Kareem as their source. But another security agency had been conducting their own investigation into embassy employees. Independent operation. Different agency. Different chain of command. This other agency had identified Kareem as suspicious. They'd been watching him. They'd documented his meetings with the service handler. They'd arrested him not knowing he was actually working for the service. Classic bureaucratic screw-up. 2 different agencies running operations in the same space without coordination. It happens. It happens in our government. It happens in their government. The service tried to protect Kareem. They tried to intervene. They tried to get him released, but the other agency wouldn't budge. They had their prize catch. They had a spy inside the American embassy. They wanted credit. They wanted glory. Kareem was prosecuted. He was convicted of espionage. He served 6 years in prison. I felt nothing about it. He'd made his choice. He'd chosen to betray the people who trusted him. He'd chosen to sell intelligence to a foreign service. The fact that we'd turned him into our own disinformation channel didn't change what he was. A traitor, a double agent, a man who smiled too much. The embassy replaced him with another local national. We ran strict background checks. We implemented enhanced security protocols. We reduced local national access to sensitive areas. We learned from our mistakes. And we kept the intelligence we'd collected about the service. We kept the personnel files. We kept the surveillance photographs. We kept the operational analysis. That intelligence remained valuable for years. Some of it is probably still being used today. Here's what I learned from 8 months of running a double agent as a disinformation channel. Intelligence work is not about certainty. It's about probability. It's about incomplete information and calculated risk and making decisions when you don't have all the facts. When I first identified Kareem as a potential double agent, I didn't know for certain. I had indicators. I had patterns. I had a gut feeling based on 30 years of watching people lie, but I didn't have proof. Not yet. I could have waited. I could have collected more evidence. I could have built an airtight case before taking any action. That's what cautious people do. That's what bureaucrats do. But waiting has a cost. Every day I waited was another day Kareem was potentially passing legitimate intelligence to the service. Every day I waited was another day our operations were at risk. So I made a decision based on probability. I assessed the risk. I concluded that the likelihood of Kareem being a double agent was high enough to justify immediate action, not arrest, not exposure, but controlled exploitation. That's the warrior mindset applied to intelligence work. You don't wait for perfect information. You act on the best information you have. You make a decision. You commit. You adjust as you learn more. And here's the other lesson. The best counterintelligence operations are invisible. Nobody outside a very small circle ever knew about Operation Mockingbird. The service never knew they'd been played. Kareem never knew he'd been feeding disinformation. The opposition government never knew their intelligence service had been compromised. Success in intelligence work often means nobody knows you succeeded. There's no glory. There's no recognition. There's no parade. There's just quiet satisfaction that you did the job correctly and nobody got hurt and the mission succeeded. That's professionalism. That's why you do the work. Not for recognition, not for medals, not for credit. You do it because it needs to be done. You do it because somebody has to. You do it because you're the guy who volunteered to be involved. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is a cool story about spies and dead drops and counterintelligence operations. You're thinking it's entertainment. You're thinking it's history. But here's what you're missing. The principles that made Operation Mockingbird successful are the same principles that make any operation successful, any mission, any goal, any objective worth achieving. First principle, observation. I found Kareem because I watched. I paid attention. I noticed patterns. I noticed deviations from patterns. Most people don't observe. They see, but they don't observe. They look, but they don't analyze. They notice surface things, but they miss the details that matter. You want to be effective? Learn to observe. Learn to see what's actually happening rather than what you assume is happening. Learn to spot patterns. Learn to notice when things don't fit. This applies to intelligence work. This applies to business. This applies to relationships. This applies to life. Second principle, patience. I didn't arrest Kareem the moment I suspected him. I didn't confront him. I didn't force the issue. I watched. I documented. I built a case. I waited for the right moment to act. Patience is not the same as inaction. Patience is controlled action. Patience is discipline. Patience is understanding that timing matters. You don't act just because you can act. You act when action will produce the result you want. Third principle, creativity. When I confirmed Kareem was a double agent, the obvious move was to arrest him. That's what the book says. That's what the regulations say. But I recommended something different. I recommended we use him. I recommended we turn their operation against them. Creativity in operations means looking beyond the obvious response. It means asking, what else could we do? What's the second order effect? What's the opportunity hidden in the problem? Fourth principle, precision. Every piece of disinformation we fed Kareem was carefully designed. We didn't just make shit up. We crafted intelligence that would be believable, verifiable, and designed to achieve specific operational goals. We measured results. We adjusted based on what we learned. Precision matters. Details matter. You can't half-ass intelligence work. You can't half-ass anything important. You do it right or you don't do it at all. I'll leave you with this. The double agent in our embassy was obvious once I knew what to look for. The man who smiled too much. The man with the Tuesday-Thursday pattern. The man passing newspapers in the park. But here's the harder truth. We all have double agents in our own lives. People who present one face while serving another agenda. People who say one thing while doing another. People who smile while undermining you. Your job is to observe. Your job is to notice patterns. Your job is to see what's actually happening rather than what people want you to see. And when you identify the threat, whether it's a double agent in your organization, a toxic person in your circle, a problem in your life, you have choices. You can eliminate it. You can expose it. You can confront it. Or you can do what we did with Kareem. You can use it. You can turn the problem into an opportunity. You can feed them exactly what you want them to know while protecting what actually matters. That's intelligence thinking. That's operational thinking. That's warrior thinking applied to whatever battlefield you're on. The battlefield might be an embassy in a foreign country. The battlefield might be an office building in your hometown. The battlefield might be your own mind fighting against doubt and fear and the voice that says you can't. Doesn't matter. The principles are the same. Observe. Be patient. Be creative. Be precise. Never quit. I'm Billy Waugh. I spent 50 years in the shit-doing work most people will never know about. I found double agents. I ran operations. I fed lies to people who thought they were winning. And I'm telling you, the skills that kept me alive in the field are the same skills that'll make you effective in your life. Learn to see what others miss. Learn to be patient when others are impulsive. Learn to think creatively when others default to obvious responses. Learn to execute with precision when others are sloppy. Do that, and you'll win every goddamn time. That's it. End of brief.